Esther chapter 9, and we're going to pick it up at verse 20. Mordecai recorded these events. He sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they'd begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast the pur, that is the lot, for their turn and destruction, or for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his son should be impaled on poles. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word pur, because of everything written in this letter and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them. The Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who joined them should without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family in every province and every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of Xerxes' kingdom, words of goodwill and of assurance, to establish these days of Purim at their designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times, the fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted. Are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai, the Jew, the second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. As the book of Esther concludes, it ends like it starts. If you remember the beginning of the book of Esther, it started with a great celebration. It was talking about this king. This king was so powerful that when he had conquered the then known world, he waited for about 3 years, which is the typical time you would wait, kill any people that had ideas of grandeur about taking over. So by the time that's all settled, the book of Esther starts with a celebration. The end of Esther ends with a celebration. And as the books open and the book closes, it's trying to speak to us. It's trying to speak to this group of people that are in exile, that are not in their home, that have been living out day by day the consequences of their poor decisions as a people. The Jews, when they're reading this, or the time this was happening, this is not happening in Jerusalem. This is not happening at the temple. This is all happening because of decisions that they've made, living in the consequences of the decisions. But how it ends is speaking to this idea of faithfulness. Who's faithful? What's going to happen? I mean, you can imagine as the story ends as if you were one in exile when you were reading the story. Or you were reading the story or you were part of the story and you're just wondering, God, how are you going to turn these events around? We're not doing the things that you asked us to do. We're not living in the place that you've told us to live. And here's this moment at the end of the story. It starts off with, there's no hope. It's not going to happen, to there's a celebration that something is happening. In the story of Esther, as we've read through the book, we see constantly over and over and over again that God is using people and demonstrating his faithfulness. So I think how the book ends, it leaves us with a couple of pictures. It leaves us with a little bit of hope for us. It shows us, as the story would be, hey, listen, it was really bad. The story was bleak for Esther. It was bleak for the people of Israel. But at the end of the story, at the end of the day, God is demonstrating faithfulness. Now, at the end of the book, they're not in the land. There is no temple. They're not the things that they should be, but what the story is doing is showing a progression. Hey, even from your really bad decisions, from the places where you're like, God, you can't do anything with this in my life, he is showing how he's taking steps to bring them back. He's demonstrating his faithfulness. You know, God's name, Elohim would be his title, God, or his name is not mentioned here anywhere in the book. And so the question is, when you're reading the book and you're expecting to read something from the Bible, you would expect to see his name somewhere, and then God did this or did that. That is left out. And what you see is God working through these people, through these characters, Esther and Mordecai. So this last section of it, understanding God's faithfulness, is the first part of this. Celebrating God's faithfulness and living in God's faithfulness. Understanding God's faithfulness. Verse 24, as it closes out, it brings us back to the kind of highlight or the central problem or plot of the book. Verse 24, for Haman's son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast the pur, that is the lot, for their ruin and destruction. The first part, or what it's trying to do at the end, is bring us back to the climax, or this moment that almost looked like it was the end for the Jewish people. The moment was someone was plotting evil against them. This Haman figure, this Haman, as he was plotting evil, as he was demonstrating his hatred for this group of people, because one person would not bow to him. Mordecai would not give him honor. He wouldn't bow to him as someone in power. And because of that, Haman in his pride says, instead of taking out Mordecai, I'm going to take anybody that's associated with this people. And what's happening as it recounts the story, as it recounts God's faithfulness, they recount it in detail. God, how were you faithful to us? What have you actually done for us, God? And I think one of the things in understanding God's faithfulness is to recount the story of our own journey, our own life, where God has brought us. Understanding God's faithfulness is understanding where he's taken us and where we've been. And so that's how the book ends. Let me tell you about this glimmer of hope for us as a people. Let me tell you about what God's going to do. And it all started in remembering what he's done. Hey, we were enemies. The issue had went out across the whole universe, the whole that they know of. Destroy this people group, and it's over. And so what he's showing at the end of the book is God's faithfulness over his enemies. So when I think about in my own story, in my own life, I think about where God has taken me, where God has done in my heart and life. The way that I can come to a better understanding, to come to a better grip of what he's done, is understanding the victory he's given me over my enemies. Over the things that were saying, you will never be brought into God. You're not good enough, not smart enough, no one likes you. Whatever the voice is, what he's saying here at the end of the book, there's a real enemy. And the enemy's saying, you're not coming in. Your story's over. And what he's pointing out here is, as he recognizes this enemy was against them. He plotted against them. Not only that, the enemy cast the pur, or the lot. Now, that might not mean a lot to us, But what had happened is Haman not only said, I'm against you, he used this this lot. It's kind of like a dice almost. And what they decided was, let's pick a day when we're going to wipe everybody out. And they said, well, how do we pick the day? Well, let's throw the lot. And the lot fell on a specific day. This was also used, and more than likely, was Haman giving tribute to some form of God. God that's out there, or the gods that he worshiped. You let me know when you want to defeat your enemy, these Jewish people. And then to seal the deal, to make sure it's totally set, to make sure there's no loose ends, I'm going to give you the privilege, gods. I'm going to give you the privilege, gods, to actually pick the day and when you want to kill him. So so he's really kind of amping it up. So the gods are going to choose the day by which they're going to kill the people. And Haman's like, there can't be a better deal out there. This is going to be great. The gods chose the day. So what God is showing is, not only is he faithful to Haman, over Haman, the enemy, he's faithful over the gods that chose the day to kill the Jews. And so what the Jewish people do, this lot, this casting of this die, this becomes symbolic for them in their story. This becomes a place where they look back at that moment when the lot was cast, and they see, because of this moment, the lot was cast, and it wasn't us who went down, but it was our enemies. It wasn't us who were destroyed, but it was our enemies. And it didn't make any sense. Haman used all the power and the ability. He pulled every lever he could find to demonstrate this is going to happen at this moment. And then it reverses. It flips. Everything that Haman said became the opposite. And the story of Esther is a story of God's faithfulness, not only over men, but over the gods. He's not going to be beat. He's not going to allow something said that he cannot undo. You know, when you think of this idea of understanding God's faithfulness, even in our own lives, the reality of it is it becomes incomprehensible. Why would God choose not only to love me, but why would he choose to do it completely over all the things that I've done, over all the things that I could do, all the things that have been done to me? Why would he choose to do that? And can he do that? And I think the story of Esther is showing at the greatest part of the greatest power, using all the power of the gods, we are going to make this voice clear. You're gone. You're done with. And then God says, no, that's not how it's going to end. Not only that, I'm in charge of all the kings and I'm in charge of all the gods. They have no power. The only thing that Scripture says about why God does what he does is because he chose to. It was his choice. The only thing that I've found is in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 4, because of God's love, his great love, he decided to show grace. So understanding faithfulness is understanding the depths of God's decision and choice to say, I am going to give you grace. And that voice of what he says is greater than what my enemy says, than what my voice says, what is said about the other gods that are over the enemy that's saying about me. God says, it's my choice. It's my decision to do what I'm going to do. And I'm going to bestow something upon you to show you that I'm faithful. The first part of it is understanding his faithfulness. How does God do this in the story? Well, he didn't come down on his Godmobile, as you'd read maybe in Ezekiel with the wheels and the clouds. How did he didn't appear in like a vision. How did God defeat his enemies? Look at what it says in verse 24. or is it verse 24? Verse 25. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his sons should be impaled on poles. The way that God chose to conquer the evil of Haman was through a person. God chose to demonstrate his faithfulness through a king who did not love him, respect him. He ended up marrying this Jewish lady. Didn't even know she was Jewish. He's got a harem. He gets drunk all the time. He's a really, 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 really bad king. Doesn't care for you, doesn't care for anybody else, doesn't care the Jews die, doesn't care about anything. All he wants to do throughout the whole book is get drunk. That's all you see him doing. So how did God choose to defeat the evil that was against the Jews? Through a dishonest person. Person had no integrity. And now when I look at that, God chose to demonstrate his faithfulness in this world through people that are crazy, that don't even make any sense. But God says, here's what I'm going to do. And what the author says here, as he's talking about it, he goes, when this plot came to the king's attention, the king dealt with it. He allowed all the circumstances to play out the way they did, to say, hey, I'm going to be faithful. Didn't appear in a vision. I didn't appear to the king, and the king had a change of mind. I used this king the way I wanted to use this king to demonstrate that I'm in charge. So God is demonstrating his faithfulness, even through unlikely vessels. Another thing, understanding God's faithfulness. What would that do for us to understand his faithfulness? A lot of times we can't see God's faithfulness because we're in the middle of the accusation. If I'm in the middle of a situation and I'm not at the end, it's really hard for me to celebrate. We celebrate lots of things throughout the year. For us in our household, there's 6 people, so 6 birthdays. The kids will tell me, oh, my birthday's coming up. And I'm like, well, didn't you have one of those last year? And that's the thing about birthdays. They always come once a year. But birthdays are marking a moment. It's a celebration. It's marking a time when something in history happened. It's an event. And I think what's happening here, understanding God's faithfulness requires looking back at an event that happened. When I understand the event, I understand the significance of the event. What it does is it speaks to me about what he has said and done. And when I think about all of God's faithfulness, I look back at the event. When I'm in the middle of, I don't understand, God, there's some wicked people that I work for, there's wicked people that are around me, God, my family's doesn't know you, all these crazy things. God, how are you faithful in this situation? Because I seem like I'm all alone, and you've kind of left me here in the middle to figure all this out. And he's like, hey, do you remember that event when I came to you? You were just like all those other people. You were just like that king. You were like your family. You didn't deserve it. But I chose to come to you. I chose to demonstrate my love for you. I chose to do that. And then what I've done, I made myself real to you. And you saw me. It changed something about you. And I think the clarity that we need a lot of times is to remember what he said. So when birthdays are so important, we sing a special song. Why do we sing the same song every year? And they're expecting it. And everybody knows it. And everybody sings it poorly. But it's expected to happen. When you go to a birthday party, what are you going to do? You're going to sing a song about what? The moment of their birth. The kids might change it. They come up with something clever. They add some funny little lines to it. But it's something that we do what? When we sing that song, it helps us to remember what? The moment of our birth, an event. What happens here at this thing, understanding God's faithfulness, is understanding that God is working through humans, not good humans that did good things, but working through humanity to show them, I'm not done with you. I'm going to be faithful. And what caused that? What was the cause or reaction to God's faithfulness? Verse 22, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, when that kind of subsided, And at the month when their sorrow had turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration, he wrote to them to observe the days of the feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. When they had that moment of relief, their response was to celebrate. That's what we do when we remember things. Our things are important to us. You want to disappoint somebody in your family? Forget about their birthday. I remember I was on this trip we were up in Nepal, and I was going to Tibet, and it's rough out there. I mean, Kathmandu is just it's a pretty intense city, and so I'm in there, and the way I came back to the United States was through was Air China, I think. Horrible experience. Fly into some random city in China. Then we don't land in the city we're supposed to. We land in this other city. It's a 4-hour delay because of some monsoon, which delayed my flight connecting back to LAX or wherever I was supposed to go. And I'm just like, holy smoke, this is so bad. So I get there, and I'm in line. I missed my connecting flight. They're like, well, you're going to be here for another 20 hours, so you just might as well make the best of it. So I found a Starbucks in there, and I'm there, and I'm just like, wow, I'm just going to make do. Sat there for about 5 hours, and I'm just exhausted because I've already been up for a good amount of time, 18 hours or so from leaving from Kathmandu, because I had to get there really early, but my flight was late at night. And anyway, it was a bad thing. I've been up for like 30-something hours. I'm just so exhausted. I shove all my stuff underneath a seat, and I roll myself up under that, and I'm like, they're going to steal it. They're gonna have to rip my hand off the thing and move me out. But then I woke up in a panic because I'm like, dear God, did I just sleep through my flight? And I'm by myself, so I'm just like, so I wake up, I'm looking at the terminal, I see the line, I'm like, oh, I didn't miss the flight. So it was from somewhere in China all the way to New York City. And I'm like, this is gonna be a long flight. The seat, you're like sitting on a piece of wood the whole time. And I'm like, man, I finally get to New York City. Well, I get to New York City because they messed up my flights. I don't even know what connecting flights. So I'm in JFK running around. So I finally grab a Delta person. I'm like, just get on the computer and tell me where I'm supposed to go. I've been up for like almost 2 days now. So they finally, and I got all this equipment because I took all these pictures, and so I got all these photography gear with me. Like, just tell me where I'm supposed to go. And they're like, oh, you got to go way over there. I'm like, of course I do. So I go over there. I finally make it in. I'm whooped. I'm like tired, and my dad was going to pick me up from the airport. My dad picks me up, and I'm just like, Dad, oh my gosh, what a whirlwind. I mean, I was just in Kathmandu like 3 days ago, and now here's the day, and I'm exhausted. I barely keep my eyes open. My phone, I look at my phone, my phone's blowing up, and it's like, and the people are like, you need to call me right now. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to catch my breath. I get right to my house, and my dad's, I'm just disappointed with you. And I'm like, one more time? What are you disappointed with me? It was my birthday today, and you haven't said in this whole car ride, happy birthday to me. And I'm like, well, I really can't say what I'm thinking right now. What? And so what I'm saying is this. Moments for people. They want you to celebrate in those moments. It didn't matter that I was on the other side of the world, layovers, missing flights, tired, probably got some disease. I was on the flight, and this lady from the British lady next to me, she's like, I'm really, really sorry. We're on the tarmac. I got to start vomiting. And she's just vomiting. She's like, I'm really, really, really sorry. She's British, so she keeps apologizing in between throwing up. And I'm like, Dad, you just want me to, and here's the thing. In his core, he just wants me to celebrate something about himself. Celebration, remembering moments in our life. That's one of the ways that we not only share and joy about an event, but it's something that when you do together, and that's why when you sing happy birthday, you normally bring everybody together. It's a big deal. The cake is the pinnacle of the moment. Then after that, everybody can go home and get out of my house. So that's the moment. But what I'm saying is, we have by nature a desire to celebrate. And so what the Jews do in this moment, the only thing they know how to do, what's deep inside of them, is they start giving gifts to poor people. They start taking their wealth. They give it out. It says here they turn from joy into their mourning into joy. And then what they did is they had a feast. So what they do is they just grab a bunch of food, they grab a bunch of people, and they're celebrating. And so the way that we recognize God's faithfulness is through celebrating, is remembering, is gathering together, is thinking about all that he's done. And what happens is there becomes such an overflow from their heart of this remembering of his faithfulness, they want to give gifts. You need celebrating, pagan, non-pagan, Christian, it doesn't matter who you are. It's woven inside of you to celebrate, to rejoice over something. So how do I understand God's faithfulness? I think back of all he's done, and what should be the result of that? There should be a celebration in my heart. Defeating the enemy, understanding what he's done for me, there should be moments that cause my heart to celebrate in him, to remember him. Now, what had happened here in the story, that because of the celebration and because of this moment, they said, we don't want this ever to go by for our people without thinking about it. We don't want to pass this moment. What we're going to do, and Mordecai and Esther, they get together and they make a rule to all the Jewish people. Every year this goes by, I want you to celebrate. I want you to stop what you're doing in your work. I want you to stop what you're doing in your family. I want you to stop life. I want you to take a moment, and I want you to give gifts to each other. I want you to have a feast. I want you to do what's necessary to do, and that's to celebrate. And now in your celebration, here's what I want you to remember. God was faithful. You see, the book is talking about God's faithfulness through unlikely people, through people you wouldn't expect, that God is moving and working. And what he's asking us to do is to step back and say, do you think he's still faithful? Do you think he's still going to do what he's going to do? Do you think that all the events of the world are the way that he out of control and he has no say in it? Do you think that he's not moving through unlikely people to make himself known? And he goes, I want you to celebrate. I want you to celebrate. This celebration that they go through, I think is really interesting, because this celebration is one of many moments in their year that they remember. I think as Americans, this might be a foreign concept to us. When we think about, you think about the Old Testament, right? And you look at them all, and it seems like God's like, okay, I want you to remember this holiday, and I want you to remember this holiday. I want you to remember this holiday, and this holiday, and this holiday. Oh, and these holidays, I want you to go to the temple to celebrate. I don't want you to do it in the local synagogue. But these holidays, you can't do in the synagogue. And you're like, there's just a lot of rules on how to party and how to celebrate. But here's what he's teaching them. Your life should be moments of remembering. Your life should have a rhythm about remembering. It was to such a degree that God says, here's what I'm going to do. Also, you have a work week that I've given you. I want you to take one day of that work week. And here's what I want you not to do. Work. Instead of what I want you to do, I want you to take time. I want you to read and reflect about all that I've done for you and how that I'm faithful. And in that reflection, I want you just to cease from working like I demonstrated for you. God's not only concerned about the rhythm of our week, he's concerned about the rhythm of our year. You know what happens is we're dictated, I think, especially in American culture, we're dictated by the rhythm of our work. That what's happening is, what we don't recognize is that God wants to desire and set up rhythms for our life throughout the year, where there's moments where you purposely put the brakes on. And when you put the brakes on, what you do, you step back out of the batter's box, you look at all that God's done, and you celebrate in your heart. You celebrate with others. You reflect, you think. He was very, very concerned to make sure that they made this a part of their rhythm, that he says, if you don't, I'm not even going to put it in the 10 Commandments, honor the Sabbath. God is concerned for us in not only the busyness of our mind, but also forgetting his faithfulness. We forget what he's done and what he will do. How do we model that in our life? You know, what I do for me personally is that I try to spend moments. I'm still doing my journaling thing I told you I was doing about it. The journal entries are getting shorter and shorter, by the way. It might be just one line, thank you. Or if I'm texting it to God, TY, but I don't know. But the moments, there's a moment in the day when I tell myself, you want to do it right now, Ryan, or are you going to do it later tonight? Well, you might be tired later tonight, so why don't you do it right now? Nah, I'll do it later tonight. But there's a moment there in my bed, getting all the stick tights out of there that my dog jumped on because she was running around in somebody's yard and jumped them in, and she rolls in my bed and gets my bed full of stick tights. I push those out because I don't want to change it. It's too much work. Sit in my bed. I grab my little journal. I look at it, take a breath, and then I take a moment to write. What am I writing? It's none of your business. No, I'm just kidding. What am I writing? Reading through Ecclesiastes right now. Reading a verse sticks out to me, I write the verse down. Then at the moment, then I just say a prayer. God, thank you for reminding me about this and what you're like. I constantly have to remind myself every day about his faithfulness. Then there's moments for me that I'm teaching all the time. So what I do personally, I listen to other people. You know, half the stuff that I tell you guys, I've stolen from other people. I'm just to let you know a little secret. But I go and I listen to other people. I take moments where I block out time. I don't got the noise of my dog, my kids. I don't have the conversation of my wife. Like how I changed that. I don't have any of those distractions. All I do is take a moment where I focus and I listen. So what I'm constantly doing throughout my week, so Tuesdays and Thursday mornings, typically, I put on a podcast as I come to work here, and I just focus, and I hear an outside voice speaking to me. Then there's moments for me where I just need to take a breath and I need to step away from everything so I can reflect and think. I think one of the most dangerous things that we do is that we don't stop. It's just go, 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 and you don't stop. And yeah, there are seasons when you have to throttle it down, but there's other seasons where you have to not only kick the throttle back, but you have to develop ways to work in midst of busy seasons. Look, when we have 4 kids. You just can't say at night, hey guys, hope it works out for you. I'll see you tomorrow or next week. You got to feed them. You got to put them to bed. You don't ever get the job of not being a parent at those moments. You're like, this is a bad idea if I knew this 10 years ago. And you have a commitment you got to make. And so the question is, well, I don't have time to figure out how to build rhythms. Well, you do. It's taking small moments, rejoicing in those small moments. Those small moments, you stack them throughout your week, they become big moments. And it's a battle of adjustment. It's constantly a battle of fighting for space and time. So not only do it's recognizing those things, the last thing I want to point out is just is the faithfulness. Not only God's understanding God's faithfulness in my life, celebrating God's faithfulness, and living in God's faithfulness. Chapter 10. It's kind of, I read a lot about it because it's just only a couple verses. It's just, Xerxes imposed a tax on everybody, okay? All that he's done were written about in some books. You can read about them, okay? But then it finishes up with verse 3. Verse 3 is this: Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews because, why was he held in high esteem? He worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare for all the Jews. One of the patterns of living in the midst of faithfulness is looking at the example of Mordecai. Mordecai was dealt a pretty bad deck. He is a guard to a really bad king. He witnessed people wanting to take the king's life. And what he chose to do was to speak up and say, hey, these guys are trying to kill the king. You should do something about it. He knew this king was dishonest. He knew this king wasn't great. But he served the king nonetheless. His employer did not dictate his faithfulness. He serves the king. The issue goes out. The issue goes out. We're going to kill all your people, Mordecai. Still serves the king. Doesn't know what tomorrow's going to bring. And the end of the book, the end of the story is Mordecai is doing the same things that he's been doing his whole life. He's not any different. But when given power and responsibility, he models what he did when he just sat in the king's court. He's modeling a life of faithfulness. And what I was intrigued by as the story continues with the story of Mordecai, he's showing he was faithful when he was just a city guard working in the temple day after day, faithful to his God, loving him. And then when God gives him a place of power, how does he demonstrate his faithfulness? Through the same acts he did when he worked at the temple, or worked at the king's palace, the citadel of Susa. Mordecai is an example of living in a place of faithfulness. And what is Mordecai's goal? What is his goal? He worked, as it says here, for the good of his people. And he spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. And this is kind of probably the last part of it, maybe to tie it all together. Mordecai had a really, really important job. He was one that not only advised the king, more than likely he might have advised the king to put the tax on the people or to put the tribute out. But he took his job seriously. And here's the deal. It doesn't tell us that King Xerxes became a good guy and became a believer and followed him. More than likely, he stayed the same goofy, really bad, not great, impure king. But Mordecai did not change, did not do less. He still fulfilled what he believed that God had called him to do. He was still faithful in his work because God had said something about him. The reason I think Mordecai demonstrates faithfulness, he's demonstrating God's character in the midst of a really bad deck he got dealt. Mordecai, all the Jews are going to die because you wouldn't pay tribute to this guy. And Mordecai is like, are you kidding me? You're going to take retribution, not only on my family, but my relatives and all of my people because I wouldn't give you tribute? Don't you think that's a little over the top for punishment? But Mordecai doesn't waver. He demonstrates faithfulness. How does he demonstrate it? Through his work. He works his job, and when he works his job, his whole goal is, how can I help people flourish? He uses his work to demonstrate God's faithfulness to him. Don't think that my job is any more sacred than your job. Your job, my job, we are here together working, and in our work, we demonstrate something. We demonstrate faithfulness to God. That's why you have a job and you work. That's why I have a job and I work. And the thing is, if I'm working here today, or if I'm working somewhere else tomorrow at a different job, God's still demanding of me that I be faithful in my work. And what is my work doing? My work benefits other people. Work was designed by God himself to benefit others. So that's why I think when Mordecai was in that temple, or that's, I keep saying temple, but it was in the capital, Mordecai said, I'm not going to let the king suffer because of these people. I'm going to speak up. Mordecai demonstrated faithfulness. He demonstrated what it means to live a life of faithfulness because he believed work comes from God. Work has been designed by God. And I'm going to demonstrate to live in this land that's not my home, to live in a place that's not my home, to die in a place that's not my home, to not see my people restored. I have every reason to be really sassy and not want to work. But I want to fulfill how God's created me to live, and that's to work. So when you go and do your job, whether through fixing computers or selling products or whatever it could be, you're demonstrating the ethic of what God's created all of us to do is to work. In our work, we're demonstrating God's faithfulness to others. You have a sacred calling on your life when you leave and you're at your job, just like I do in my job. All of us are to demonstrate faithfulness in our work because we believe work, as what Mordecai does here, he's given like the vice president job. And what does he use his work for? To help other people thrive. God's called you to work, and in your work, your job is to help other people thrive. And when you help other people thrive, what are you doing? You're demonstrating God's faithfulness to you. You want to see other people thrive. You want to see other people do the things that they're to do. You want to help by making the place a better place to live. You want to use your gifts God's given you for the sake of others. And so I think the last part of it is, when you understand God's faithfulness, you're able to build rhythms in your life where you can celebrate him. And in celebrating him, you then can fulfill what he's called us all to do, is to demonstrate that faithfulness to others, not only through our witness, but through our work, to demonstrate how we live towards others. Because what I believe is, if you start looking at the situation in the moment, you're going to be overwhelmed. You're not going to want to do it. It's going to be too difficult. This is a really bad deck you gave me, God. Mordecai had every option to do that. Esther had every option to do that. But they chose not to. They said, this is really bad hand we've been given. All we can do is be faithful. So God, I'll go before the king. I'll do it. What do I have to lose? As I do that, and then at the end of it, now let's take this moment of God's faithfulness and let's celebrate it every year. I think the beautiful thing about the story of Esther is seeing God's faithfulness in the reality of everyday life and believing that he's going to do that. Even when things don't make sense to me right now. And I can think for Mordecai, he's in sackcloth and ashes crying out to God saying, this isn't fair. What is going on? He couldn't see the end of the story. He couldn't see what his lot would be. But that's not what he lived for. I want to be the number 2 guy. What he wanted to say was, God, you're faithful to me. Even in the situation, I'm going to demonstrate faithfulness because I believe something about you. And I believe what you've said about me, God, is enough. It's sufficient. That's what I'm going to rejoice in. So take moments in your day, take moments in your week to celebrate. Even if they're small moments, reflect, think. And when you do that, you're going to start to see your work change, your perspective change. You're going to start to see moments where you can rejoice in the faithfulness in the midst of a situation that doesn't make sense. Let's pray together. So Lord Jesus, we thank you for your faithfulness. God, you came to this earth. There's moments where you prayed, God, if there's another way, please let it be done. But you were obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Through your obedience, you've demonstrated not only what it means to trust you, but to trust you when you're being persecuted, trusting you when things don't seem the way they seem to us. And God, you led an example for us. So I pray that you would continue to make us here in at this church, that we'd be faithful, that we would rejoice and celebrate moments. When we have opportunities to worship, that we would worship. When we have opportunities to talk about your faithfulness, that we would do that. God, that we would be a people that recognize your faithfulness to us. God, because you've created us to celebrate. You've created us to remember and to reflect and to think. Help us to realize, God, and to think this week that, God, you have conquered the enemy. You've conquered evil. You've conquered death. And God, that what you say about us is that we'll be with you. Lord, we don't know how our life's going to end. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. We don't even know what this night will bring. But what we do know is that you're faithful. And God, help us to put our trust in you and your gospel. In your name we pray. Amen.